I'm Alexa Schwerha with Campus Reform, and you're watching 5 Big Questions. Collegiate swimming has made a splash in the news cycle after the NCAA announced a policy change that tackles transgender participation in athletics. Now, transgender participation will be deemed a sport-by-sport basis, allowing each sport to designate specific rules and regulations that meet the qualifications before a transgender athlete can compete. In response, organizations such as the Collegiate Swimming Coaches Association and USA Swimming have proposed changes to the guidelines, and all in light of the NCAA Swimming Championships in March. These changes come during a national discussion on the future of women's sports and the place that biological men have in the division. Here to talk more about the recent policy changes that are rocking the waves and talk more about the state of women's sports is former University of Southern California head coach David Salo. In addition to the collegiate level, Salo has also coached nationally for the United States men and women's teams and has coached athletes at the Olympics, World Championships, and the Pan-Pacific Championships. Coach Salo, thank you so much for joining me today.
Alexa, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. So let's focus in real quick on the new NCAA policy. Do you think that this is going to provide clarity for transgender participation, or is sport-by-sport basis just going to add more confusion?
Well, first off, the NCAA did not make a decision themselves. They threw it back at the governing bodies for each sport to make a determination as to how they're going to handle the transgender issue in competition. I think USA Swimming, with good consulting from a lot of resources, had tried to make an effort to create a favorable environment for transgender athletes to compete in women's sports. My position is that we need to do everything we can to protect women and biological women, biological girls in sport, and in particular competition. And swimming, in this example this year, with Lia Thomas with University of Pennsylvania, just kind of brings it to the forefront. My position has always been that it's an arbitrary determination that if you minimize the amount of testosterone in the transitional person's body, that's good enough to determine that woman, as a transition woman, can compete against biological women. I just don't think that's true. My biggest concern is when you arbitrarily decided that there's a 3-year period minimum to secure a base level of testosterone levels in transitional women. That one, it's arbitrary. 2, it's an arbitrary number of 3 years. But the reality is that my background is exercise physiology, and I speak to biological homeostasis, and that if an athlete comes off of the suppressants of testosterone levels, their body will result back to biological homeostasis, which for a transgender woman would be a man. The other unintended consequence is that if we're saying there needs to be a 3-year period of time where you suppress testosterone, you might start to see prepubescent determination of transitioning. I just think that's a slippery slope that we don't want to go to. Clearly, when you throw it back to the sports national governing bodies to make that determination as to how to handle this, it's going to be very, very different for each sport. We realize that. But there's consequences beyond college. So these things don't go away because you determine that you'll make a 3-year commitment of transitioning, maintain this level of suppression. But there's years beyond that. Olympic sports like swimming goes to Olympic participation and world participation as well. That's going to be impacted by all the decisions made. So my bottom line is we need to protect the biological interests of the biological women and girls in our sport and competition. That's the priority here than anything else.
Absolutely. And you brought up Lia Thomas, and Thomas has been the center of the controversy as collegiate swimming really has made national headlines. And after the NCAA put out the sport-by-sport basis, we've seen changes come to USA Swimming. The policy now requires that biological men have record low levels of testosterone 36 months before competing alongside women. And this has raised a lot of questions, not only among swimming fans, but people in general, speculating that maybe this will make Thomas ineligible to compete in March. Can you shine a light on if this will be true?
Well, I suppose that the rules that have been put into place right now will disqualify Lia Thomas from competing at her conference championships coming up shortly, and the NCAA championships coming up in March. I'm sure that's probably what's probably most likely going to happen, unless it goes to law, the court of law, and how they determine that. But the reality is that if Lia is allowed to compete, and I want Lia to compete, I want Lia to if she's a transitional woman, that's what she wants to be. I support her. The decision to make that change in your life is amazing. It's incredible. I give her all the credit and for having that courageous decision to make that decision. But you can't allow that to impact all the women in our sport. And it's as I've said all along, that you're impacting not only the women you directly compete against in the event that she swims. Should she win the event, 200 freestyle as an example, and she takes down the NCAA record, she displaces Missy Franklin, who worked very hard for her career to go 139 the 200-yard freestyle. It also dismisses the role that Terry McKeever, one of the best coaches, female coaches in our country, historically, it will dismiss the results that she worked with Missy to accomplish. So that's one element. And the other element is the swimmer that's left off the top 8 championship finals because Lia has taken that slot. It also displaces the person who finishes 17th place, who should finish 16th place. They don't get to compete for points for their team. And then it displaces the athlete who's not going to be invited to the competition because a spot is taken by Lia Thomas. So Lia should be allowed to compete against the clock, shouldn't be allowed to compete against biological women. I think that's fair and reasonable. In our sport, in swimming, I know the championships are going to be held at the Georgia Tech in Atlanta. I think they have the capacity to swim as many as 10 lanes in finals. And in this circumstance this year, to get us through this year, let Lia swim, but have 9 people in the finals of the championship. Should she win and she breaks the record, she gets to share the podium for the gold medal with the biological woman that wins the biological race. And if she breaks the record, she gets to share that record with Missy Franklin. There's an asterisk in the record book that this is the circumstance by which she has a time that might be faster than Missy Franklin. So I don't know exactly what's going to be the outcome for this year. I think there will probably, as you know, there will probably be lawsuits that protect the interests of Lia Thomas to compete this year because it's so difficult to introduce a policy statement and then implement that in 2 months' time. So I don't know the course of action. I don't know where it's going to go, but that would be my solution this year, and then be more formidable in the policies that you create going forward.
Right. And then to focus a little more on the College Swimming Coaches Association, I know the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform covered this part of the story. You were able to provide more comment and more insight into it, but they requested that an additional spot be added to the national championships to accommodate Thomas without taking away opportunity from a biologically female swimmer. Can you explain a little more about this proposal, and is it going to help the women competing in March, or is it just going to add another barrier that has to be overcome?
Well, as I said, I think the College Swim Coaches Association proposal really doesn't answer the question, doesn't create fair playing field for biological women. As I said, there are only so many roster spots allowed at the NCAA championships. So you open it up for one more spot, it still displaces, should Lia win the event, and I'm talking in particular 200 free, possibly the 500 freestyle as well, she will displace the biological women who would win the event. The woman who would normally finish 8th place is now displaced into 9th place position. So she's competing in the constellation finals. And the person that would not be swimming in the constellation finals, because instead of being 16th, she in fact would be 17th because this additional swimmer, Lia Thomas, being in the event. So it's not a solution at all. My solution's better. Go to 10 lanes or 9 lanes for the events that Lia swims in, recognizing this is a unique situation. And I think Georgia Tech can handle 9 lanes for finals. And she gets to compete, goes against the clock. If she wins the event, she gets to share that gold medal with the biological woman that wins the race. And if she breaks her record again, if she goes in the record books with an asterisk to her name, sharing that distinction with Missy Franklin. That's a better solution because nobody's displaced out of the consolation finals, out of the final championship heat, and certainly not somebody not being allowed to be in the competition altogether because we've displaced that person with Lia Thomas. So that's the more fair situation. That can't happen every year because not all facilities can handle 9 lanes of championship swimming. But I think our sport, it's obviously this is brought forward because of swimming. It's forefront. It's Lia Thomas is an outstanding swimmer as a female. She, when she was a male swimmer, Will Thomas, was a really pretty good male swimmer as well. And so that's the dynamic that's associated with this. And that's why I think there's so much controversy is that here you have 2 years ago was a very capable, very competitive male swimmer now going into women's swimming with only a year's time that I understand of suppressing testosterone. So it's not a fair playing field. We need to make it we need to protect the interest of women and girls in sport. And that's got to be the priority. I believe that's got to be the priority over the situation with Lia Thomas and the transgender issue. I'm not an expert by any stretch in this. I'm not transphobic, I'm not homophobic, I'm not racist. We always have to clarify these things nowadays, but I'm not afraid of the situation. I give her tons of credit for being courageous to make this decision. You don't do that haphazardly. And even Caitlyn Jenner has come out against the idea of Lia Thomas competing against biological women. Lia Thomas has had 20 odd years of growth as a biological male. That doesn't go away. But once we step out of the swimming environment and the Ivy League environment, and this goes further down the road where a 7-foot basketball player transitions to a female and she goes into collegiate NCAA competition or into the WNBA, that's a huge impact on a whole different class of individuals. And people will maybe raise a bigger stink on that as a result of that. But it's going to confound the playing field dramatically. And I just don't want to see that.
Right. And I'm actually really glad that you brought up the whole gender situation, because there has been a lot of celebrities and people in general that have been adding to the discussion. They've been getting involved in the controversy and making their opinions heard over whether or not, Thomas should be able to compete in the women's division. Campus Reform previously reported on an Olympics official who actually resigned because of the unfairness that she believed was happening in women's sports. So I'm really curious, what made you as a former collegiate coach want to speak out about this issue?
Well, I think clearly we all understand there's a political climate going on right now that if you don't side with the cause going on of the day, then you're going to be criticized and very likely lose your position in your career. You'll lose your job. I know a lot of college coaches that stand right behind me with this particular opinion, but they can't say anything. I'm semi-retired. I don't coach in a collegiate environment anymore. I'm financially capable of not having a job, so I'm in a position where I can speak out in a way that nobody else can speak out. And so it's not going to compromise me, and I can take the criticism. People will call me again. You say something contrary to supporting Lia Thomas competing, and somebody wants to call you transphobic. It's like, I'm not afraid of trans people. I would coach Lia Thomas, and I would coach Lia Thomas to race against the clock, and I would want her to be the best that she can be. And I don't begrudge that. I have a coaching colleague friend of mine who transitioned in his late 60s, and just to wrap yourself around this deep-seated issue within his mind for all these years to transition at late 60s. I'm amazed by that at 65 or 70, whatever, forget it, I'm not going to do it. But here he did that, and I give him full credit that it's just like, wow, what bravery that you possess, that you would do that so late in your life. Caitlyn Jenner, same thing. When I was a boy growing up and Bruce Jenner was the guy that we wanted to be, and then to realize he harbored this feeling inside and just tormenting feeling inside for him to make a transition to become a woman, because that's what he feels inside. It's just, here's a guy who has everything, good looks, great hair, beautiful wife and kids, and to do that, to change his life so dramatically and come under the criticism that comes along with that. So I give them every credit possible, and I'm certainly not transphobic. But again, on protecting the interests of women and girls in sport. But again, I'm in a position where I can speak my mind and not be afraid of losing my job. I don't think I could have spoken my mind if I was still the head coach at the University of Southern California, because it would not mesh with their narrative. And just that's just kind of where we stand in the politics of the day. And it's unfortunate. We can't have a really good non-emotional conversation about what's the best interest for both women and transgender athletes.
Absolutely. And then my final question here, as someone who has mentored and coached female athletes at the collegiate level, what do you think might be being misunderstood about this debate to protect fairness in women's sports?
Well, it's interesting. I have a small group of athletes that I coach right now. They're all postgraduate athletes, and I had a very heated conversation about kind of generational positioning, if you will, this generation, the under 20s, they're so inclusive, and I applaud them that they're extremely inclusive, and you got to love that about their generation. And they don't think, well, it doesn't really affect me. And so it's like, no, it doesn't affect you, but it affects a whole, it affects 50% of our population. And no, not directly to you one of the swimmers from Stanford came out and said, I'll race against her. And that's beautiful. That's wonderful. But it just clouds the fairness doctrine that we possess in sport. We create sport, we create rules that govern the sport so that the playing field is even. We've gone out of our way over the last 60 years or so to ban performance-enhancing drugs. So athletes currently that are very capable are tested on a regular basis to make sure that they're not taking steroids, they're not taking masking drugs, they're not taking beta suppressors to keep their heart rates low when they're shooting guns and stuff like that. And yet somehow taking a suppressor of testosterone is not on that list of things that you test for to say, no, that disqualifies you as an athlete. We've got to just have a nice, non-emotional conversation. Don't challenge people's phobias or suggest there's something they're not because they don't agree with one side or the other. Let's just have a really common courtesy conversation about how can we be as inclusive as possible without denigrating the playing field and without compromising the opportunities for biological women, in this case, to compete against like-minded individuals. And I think that's what we have to protect.
Well, Coach, thank you so much for coming on today. We appreciate your insight.
Alexa, thank you very much. I appreciate it.